What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through my Week 10 top 12 defense rankings. I've already posted the running backs, wide receivers, quarterbacks, and tight ends, so check those out if you haven't seen them already. But let's just dive right into tier one. And I actually have four different defenses in this top tier. I'm going to start it off with the Broncos going up against the Raiders. Broncos, just a super strong fantasy defense. They are eighth in points per game. They're leading the NFL in sacks. And I want to say it's by like 12 or 13 total. Like their pass rush has just been super impressive. And then this is a good matchup against the Raiders. I know the Raiders had a good offensive bounce back game against the Jaguars. But to be fair, a lot of that was kind of later, like fourth quarter into overtime. They're only implied 16 points this week per Vegas. That's the lowest implied point total. And then defenses going up against the Raiders are scoring the third most fantasy points per game. So like the Broncos at number one. Then I've got the Seahawks going up against the Cardinals as my second defense. Seahawks first in points per game so far. They are third in sacks. They are fourth in interceptions. And then the Cardinals have the fifth lowest implied point total. I will point out, like the Cardinals offense has looked pretty solid with Jacoby Brissett at quarterback, but I still don't think this is an above average offense. And I really like the Seahawks defense, just on their own. Then I've got the Texans going up against the Jaguars. And this Texans team, like offensively, they're brutal. The defense is really top tier. They are second this season in fantasy points per game. They're allowing a league low 15.1 points per game. And then the Jaguars have the fourth lowest implied point total. Their offensive weapons are banged up. You've got Travis Hunter on IR, Brenton Strange still out. You've got BTJ who's banged up. And then they did bring in Jacoby Myers, but he doesn't strike me as some sort of massive difference maker. And he's coming in, it's going to be a short week. I think the Texans are a really nice play. And then the last defense I have in tier one is going to be the Browns going up against the Jets. Jets offense, just pretty rough. They're seventh in points per game allowed. And then they have the third lowest implied point total this week. The Browns defense hasn't been amazing from a fantasy perspective, but I still think they're a really strong unit. Jets, clearly punting this season. Justin Fields, he's been really hit or miss, honestly, mostly miss. So Browns, I think they can step up and have a nice week 10. Now moving into also a pretty large tier two, going to start it off with the Panthers going up against the Saints. And matchup wise, this is a great spot for the Panthers. The Saints have the second lowest implied point total. Teams going up against the Saints are scoring the fourth most fantasy points per game. The Panthers defense has been pretty hit or miss. 2 weeks ago, week 8, they give up a 40 piece to the Bills. Then they look really good last week against the Packers. My kind of lack of trust in their defense is why they're not in tier one, because it's a great matchup, but I do think the defense will win out this week. Then at number 6, I've got the Lions going up against the Commanders. Obviously, the Commanders offense, super banged up. Jaden Daniels going to be out. Terry McLaurin likely out. The Lions defense has been solid for fantasy, sixth in points per game, and then they are second in both sacks and forced fumbles. At number 7, also in tier 2, I've got the Jaguars going up against the Texans. Now, this is kind of assuming that CJ Stroud is not playing. If Stroud does play, I actually think the Jaguars are still a fine option. They've been very opportunistic. They're second in interceptions. Texans down at 20 implied points. Obviously, you would trust the Jaguars less if Stroud is playing. If it's Davis Mills, I think you have to feel really good about the Jags. And then the last team in tier 2, it's the Bills going up against the Dolphins. The Bills defense had kind of been hit or miss early on in the season. They looked great against the Chiefs. Had Patrick Mahomes out there really struggling, put the pressure on him. Mahomes didn't handle it well. I think he was 15 of 34 through the air. I want to say that's his lowest completion percentage in a start so far in his career. So shout out to the Bills for that. Defenses going up against the Dolphins are top 6 in points per game. And then the Dolphins have a fairly low 20 implied points. Tier 3 is just going to be a one-team tier. It's not a great matchup, but I just trust the defense. It's the Rams going up against the 49ers. The Rams are third in points per game. They are third in sacks. They are second in fumble recoveries. And then the 49ers offense is just solid. I'm not trying to hunt them offensively. You've got Christian McCaffrey. You've got George Kittle. But I also don't think there's some sort of super elite unit where, you got to avoid the Rams. So I think the Rams, very fine option this week. And then the fourth and final tier, this is where it starts to not feel great at the defense spot. At number 10, I'm going to go with the Jets. And admittedly, this does feel pretty sketchy because they just gutted their defense at the deadline with Sauce Gardner going to the Colts and then Quinnen Williams going to the Cowboys. But we have to remember, like, this Browns offense is still really poor. Defense is going up against them or scoring the 5th most points per game. Even after those moves with the Jets, the Browns are still down at 20 implied points. And Dillon Gabriel just like doesn't scare me. Like maybe the Jets don't end up being an amazing play, but I'd be pretty surprised if Dillon Gabriel went out there and like led the Browns to like 30 plus points. It just seems very unlikely. So Jets, they do feel kind of sketchy with the trades, but I actually do think they're still playable this week. Then the team that just acquired Sauce Gardner, we've got the Colts going up against the Falcons. Colts defense has been solid, 7th in points per game. The Falcons offense has been pretty hit or miss. They've had some big games. Drake London coming off a nuclear performance. Bijan has had some monster performances. They're sitting at like a fine 21 implied points. I do think the Sauce addition is a big deal for the Colts. The secondary had been rough. He obviously helps them out there. And then the final defense, I've got the Chargers going up against the Steelers. This is pretty much like a pretty mid defense going up against a pretty mid offense. I don't have full trust in the Chargers defense, but I'm also not super concerned about the Steelers offense just going out and completely shredding them. So tier 4, like not the most amazing options, but they're fine. There are like some pretty good offenses on bye, so leads to some decent quality options. But that is going to wrap it up for my top 12. Check out the other positional rankings if you haven't seen them. Stay tuned. I'll have my flex rankings coming out tomorrow. But thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.